Morning, all. All right, so I want to take a look at the race in the West. I want to do that on Sunday morning because, sure, why not? Before we get the game started and all that. And on the left side of the board, we got three teams that are above the playoff line. On the right side, we've got two teams left that are threatening to get further into this conversation and maybe onto this side of the board. And in Vegas's case, I think they have an excellent chance of ending up on this side of the board. But let's take a look. So we'll start off with the LA Kings. 73 games played, 38, 25, and 10 record for 86 points. They have exceeded all expectations of them this year. They are number 3 right now in the Pacific. But over their last 10 games, they're 4, 4, and 2. And then they also have 29 regulation wins, which is lower than that of Vegas here. And if Vancouver was to catch them, odds are Vancouver would end up with more than what LA has. So while it's unlikely that with 9 games left, Vancouver makes up that difference, it's still something to watch because the regulation wins would likely favor Vancouver if they had the same number of points, unless Vancouver wins their games in overtime or shootouts to get there. So today, the LA Kings are in Minnesota, and it's the start of a 3-game road trip. Then they go to Chicago, they go to Colorado. So 2 of those 3 are tough, and I could see them coming out of that road trip with 2 losses in 3 games and people saying, well, they might be in trouble. However, Saturday they're then against Columbus. That's a home game for them. Then they go to Anaheim. They're at home against Chicago and Anaheim. And then they go to Seattle and Vancouver to round out the season, meaning 7 of their final 9 games are against teams that are currently below the playoff line. And after they play Colorado on Wednesday, they don't have another game against a team above the playoff line. Now, there is the possibility that LA plays down to the opposition and runs into trouble. I will say this, 2 games against Anaheim. Even though Anaheim's stripped themselves down at the deadline, those games are normally pretty hotly contested. So I would be surprised if LA completely won out, but I wouldn't be surprised if they make the playoffs. 9 games left. If they get 9 points in those 9 games, that'd be 95 points. That would force Vancouver to get 15 points in their last 9 games, and it would force the Vegas Golden Knights to have to get a lot of points as well. They're 2 points back of LA, but again, if LA plays 500 hockey, it's going to make it difficult for Vegas too. Although it's the possibility is still there. But I'm just saying that with a 500 record, with 7 games against non-playoff teams, 2 of them against Chicago, 1 against Seattle, they should be able to win those games. So, in my opinion, LA's in. Nashville, 71 games, 41, 26, and 4 record, 86 points for them. They're the number 1 wild card. Their last 10 games are 6 and 4. They have 34 regulation wins. So that's your first tiebreaker, and they have that tiebreaker on everybody else on the board. So that's good. Nashville's in good shape that way. Today they're at Pittsburgh, which is going to be a tough challenge because Pittsburgh, 4 losses in a row in regulation. They're due for a win. I said that yesterday about the Washington game too, though. Then they go Tuesday. They go home. They play against San Jose. They play against Edmonton at home as well on Thursday. And then next Saturday, they're at home against Chicago. So could be a lot of movement in the power rankings, really. But this week, 2 of the 4 are against teams outside the playoffs, 1 against Edmonton. Again, this isn't a really horrible schedule. It does speak to just how busy the schedule is that we see the 3 teams on this side of the board have 4 games this week. So after that, they're then at home against St. Louis and Calgary. Then they go to Tampa for 1 game, come home against Minnesota and Calgary, and then they round out their season with a mini road trip into Colorado and then into Arizona. So only 3 of their final 11 games are against non-playoff teams. So they have a tough schedule. They absolutely do. But again, they have the tiebreaker and regulation wins. And by the time they meet Colorado, Colorado should have at least sewn up their division and the West and might have sewn up the President's Trophy. So by the time they play Colorado, we might be in a situation where they rest some of their best players getting ready for the playoffs, which could favor Nashville in that game. They have 2 against Calgary. Both of them are in Nashville. Be interesting to see how those ones turn out, to be honest. Calgary as well could be home and cleared with the division. And in one of those games, they could absolutely be resting players as well. It's frustrating when you look at the schedule and you realize, these teams are really good, but it's towards the end of the season, they might be resting players. And it can get frustrating for any fan base that's going, man, we need a Nashville loss. What do you mean Colorado's sitting everybody? So we'll see how that turns out. But again, I like Nashville's chances. I don't see these teams ending up outside the playoffs. Dallas, I have some concerns. 71 games, so they have 11 left. 40, 27, and 4 record. They have 84 points. They are the number 2 wild card. Their last 10 games are 6-3 and 1. But they have 26 regulation wins. They don't have a tiebreaker on Vancouver or Vegas that way. And this is where it's interesting when you look at Dallas. Last year, they couldn't win in overtime or shootouts. This year, they have 14 wins that are in shootouts or in overtime. They're one of the best teams in overtime and in shootouts. The drawback of that being that your first tiebreaker to make the playoffs is the regulation win. So, today they're at Chicago. Then they come home and play 3 for the rest of the week. Tuesday against Tampa, Thursday against Minnesota, and Saturday against San Jose. Then they go on a road trip. They go to Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary. I'll be at the Vancouver game. Then they're at home against Seattle, Vegas, Arizona, and Anaheim. So they do have 7 of their 11 remaining games at home, which normally would be good, but their home record doesn't seem to be as good lately as it was earlier in the year. So there's some concern. And then my concern with Dallas is simple. They lost to Seattle and New Jersey over the last 7 days, I should say. And so losing to those teams over the last week has me looking at their 6 games against non-playoff teams out of their 11 remaining games and saying, we'll see. We'll see how it turns out. For instance, today at Chicago, winnable game, but they just played yesterday against New Jersey. Chicago didn't play yesterday, so we'll see. And again, they've already shown they could lose against Seattle. The San Jose game, I would not be all that surprised if San Jose ends up winning against Dallas in that game. But we'll see how it all turns out. But I do think of the teams on this side of the board, Dallas is not just because they're 2 points back of other teams, but because of recent play, I think they're in more peril. Vegas, 73 games, 40, 29, and 4 record, 84 points, tied for that last wild card spot with Dallas. Dallas has it because they've played fewer games. Regulation wins, Vegas, 32 of them. So, in terms of numbers, if these teams end up tied, Vegas gets that playoff spot. The last 10 games as well, Vegas 7-3. The best numbers on the board. I will say this, there is the possibility that Vegas ends up passing LA. It's not highly likely, but it's possible. Over their last 10 games, they have 14 points. Over their last 10 games, LA has 10. Stranger things have happened. And then you have Vegas and Edmonton in the first round. Yes, please. I don't think it matters who faces who in the first round right now. I think we're going to have great playoff matchups. So this week, just 3 games for Vegas this week because they have fewer games left to play than others. Tuesday, they're at Vancouver. Thursday, they're at Calgary. Saturday, they're at Edmonton. So they're doing the Western Canada swing. And we'll see how that goes. Vancouver playing some desperate hockey recently. We'll see. And again, Vancouver could have an effect on Dallas's ability to make the playoffs. So Vancouver could have a direct effect on which of these 2 teams makes the playoffs. And maybe that could help propel them into a playoff spot. But again, we'll see. Their upcoming games after this week, they being Vegas, they're at home against New Jersey, Washington, and San Jose. Then they finish out the season on the road. Dallas, Chicago, and St. Louis. That game in Dallas could be huge. Absolutely huge. Could be not necessarily a win and you're in situation because they both have 2 games left after that for the rest of the season, but it could set the tone. So for Vegas, they have 4 against non-playoff teams out of their 9 remaining games. Oh, I also want to throw in here that when I have the non-playoff teams on here, I did not count Vegas as a non-playoff team on either of these boards because they are tied for that last spot and they actually have that tiebreaker. So for this video, I have basically Vegas and Dallas both as playoff caliber teams due to that fact. So again, while they only have 4 left against non-playoff teams, the other games, they've shown that they can beat Calgary. They've shown they can beat Edmonton. Now, on the road in Calgary, it's a bit of a different story for Vegas usually. I do believe that for a while there, I know Calgary couldn't win in Vegas and Vegas couldn't win in Calgary. So we'll see if that storyline changes towards the end of this year. But that road trip in Dallas, Chicago, St. Louis, winnable. Again, St. Louis, the last game of the year, St. Louis at that point should be firmly entrenched, I would think, in second or third, and so might be resting a couple of players for that last game. So then we get to Vancouver, the most unlikely on the board, right? So if they're going to win this, they have to kind of win out, and they have a tough schedule. So they've played 73 games, 35, 28, and 10 record for 80 points. I'm just grateful that they don't have a losing record at this point, because the way the season started, I would have bet on a losing record. Last 10 games, they're 5-2-3. They have 29 regulation wins. So they're behind Nashville in that category. They're behind Vegas in that category. They're ahead of Dallas in that category. So the possibility that's here, and I heard this discussed on Hockey Night in Canada last night, is that Vegas would overtake LA, and that maybe Vancouver could somehow get in past Dallas if LA has struggles down the stretch. It's not likely. The likeliest scenario to me is that Vegas could pass LA, and then LA bumps Dallas out of that final wild card spot. That I could see happening, and then of course you'd get LA against Colorado in the first round, and Vegas would play the Edmonton Oilers. And I remember an LA Colorado series back in, I want to say 2001 was that big series, and of course Colorado wins the Stanley Cup that year, but LA gave them quite the run. So yeah, we'll see. But for Vancouver, their upcoming schedule, they've only got 2 games this week. So they're at home against Vegas and Arizona. Vegas on Tuesday, Arizona on Thursday. They can rest up a bit. The problem is they're going to be watching other teams they're chasing playing and getting points. Well, they can't. Then for the rest of the season, they're at home against Dallas and Ottawa. Before they go to Minnesota and Calgary, they come home and play Seattle and Edmonton, and then they finish the season at Edmonton. So you got to be hoping Edmonton would be resting McDavid, Draisaitl, Smith, Koskinen, Kane, Yamamoto, Keith, Nurse. I mean, you're hoping they rest basically everybody if you're the Canucks for that last game, and that maybe that gets them in. But if Edmonton knows that's a win and you're in situation, do they maybe play a bit of a tougher lineup? So that's, I don't think they necessarily would care, but maybe they'd view it as a more like, okay, this is a playoff experience. We'll throw everybody in there. Or if it was going to be a playoff type game, because you got a really fierce team coming in Vancouver that's trying to win and get in, do you say, you know what, this could be a really rough game. We don't want to play star players. So that's out there. But only 3 of the final 9 games the Canucks play are against teams that are below the playoff line. And in terms of playing against teams that are comfortably in the playoffs, the road trip to Minnesota and Calgary, those are teams comfortably in the playoffs. I don't know that Vancouver wins in Minnesota or in Calgary. We'll see. But it's going to be an interesting little ride. And again, if Vancouver, I'm wearing Vancouver because, of course, I'd love to see them make it. But if Vancouver falls short, I think that this season can be viewed as a relative success after the firing of Travis Green. And, of course, the questions will then be asked of why didn't it happen sooner? If Travis Green was gone 3 weeks earlier, 2 weeks earlier, the Canucks might have had an extra 4 or 5 points. They might have been on this side of the board rather than this side of the board, and it'd be a completely different conversation we're having. But here we are. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I don't think that my predictions have changed that much, although I've gone from saying, no, Dallas should be in, to saying, yeah, I do think Vegas gets in. I do get the feeling that Vegas gets in. This 11 games remaining, we've got 19 days left until the end of the season, including today. So it's a lot of games in a short period of time. And so we'll see if Vancouver and Vegas, with a little bit of rest this week, ends up being able to catch up to Dallas, who might be a bit tired, but we'll see. And I've thought that of a couple of their recent games as well, that Dallas seems a little bit either fatigued or just out of sync. And so by the end of the year, we'll see if that clears itself up. So has your prediction of who makes the playoffs in the West changed? Is it the same? Let me know in the comment section below who you think is going to make it, who you think won't. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.